When my oldest son passed away, I received a phone call that changed everything. "Ma'am, I've discovered something about your son that you need to know. It is urgent. Come to my office immediately, but don't tell anyone in the family. It could be dangerous." His boss's voice was trembling. When I arrived, I froze at the sight of who was there. But before I continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories travel. I never thought that at 62 years old, I would be attending the funeral of my firstborn. Matthew was only 38, a man of integrity, dedicated to his job as a financial analyst, and above all, an exemplary son. They say no mother should have to bury her son, and now I understood the devastating pain behind those words. Matthew's body had been found in his apartment 3 days earlier, the victim of an apparent heart attack. No one expected it. He was always healthy, exercised regularly, and had just passed a full physical. The doctors spoke of sudden death, undetected genetic predisposition, cold terms that didn't explain why my son was now inside a coffin. During the wake, I watched my younger son, Robert, organizing everything with admirable efficiency. He and his wife, Clara, took care of every detail of the funeral, while I remained seated, numb with grief. "Mum, just leave it in our hands. You just need to rest," Robert kept repeating, with that protective tone he had been using with me for the last few years. Something bothered me, but I attributed it to my fragile emotional state. Robert seemed too composed. It wasn't that I expected to see him lose control, but there was an almost unsettling serenity in his demeanor. Clara remained by his side, always attentive, always vigilant, as if she were monitoring every movement around. After the burial in the Hollywood cemetery, everyone went back to my house. As the guests were serving themselves the coffee that Clara had arranged, I sat in a corner of the living room, observing Matthew's portrait above the fireplace. It was then that I noticed the whispered conversations between Robert and Clara, the exchanged glances. Something seemed out of place. "Mum, we need to talk about the future," Robert said, sitting next to me once the last guests had left. "This house is too big for you alone. Clara and I talked, and we believe it would be best for you to sell it and move to a smaller condo, or perhaps to that retirement community near our place in Orange County." The suggestion took me by surprise. "But son, we just buried your brother. I don't think this is the time to—" "Precisely because of that, Mum," Clara interrupted in her melodious voice. "Matthew left so suddenly. Life is unpredictable. We need to think about your well-being." I nodded distractedly, unable to process the conversation. That's when the phone rang. Robert quickly got up to answer it. "Who was that?" I asked when he returned with a tense expression. "No one important," he answered evasively. "Just someone from Matthew's office wanting to speak with you about some paperwork." "What paperwork?" "Nothing for you to worry about right now, Mum. I told him to call back another time. You need to rest." That night, alone in my room, exhaustion finally overcame me. I was almost asleep when my cell phone vibrated. Unknown number. "Mrs. Audrey? I'm Charles Mason, the financial director at the company where your son worked." "Yes," I replied, trying to clear my head. "Ma'am, I need to talk to you urgently in private. It's about your son." My heart sped up. "About Matthew? What happened?" There was a pause before he answered. "I can't talk over the phone. Could you come to my office first thing tomorrow morning? And please, do not mention this conversation to anyone, especially your other son or his wife." "Why not?" "Please, trust me. It's for your own safety. Come at 9 o'clock in the morning, the company address in downtown Chicago." After hanging up, I was awake for hours. Why all the secrecy? What could Charles Mason know about Matthew that required such discretion? And why specifically mention Robert and Clara? The next morning, I told Robert I needed to buy some medicine. He insisted on going with me, but I was firm. Son, I need some time alone. It's just a drugstore. I drove to the corporate center in downtown Chicago, where Matthew had worked for over 10 years. The imposing glass and steel building always impressed me. At the reception, I announced that I had a meeting with Charles Mason. I was escorted to the top floor, an executive area I had never been to before. Charles greeted me personally, a middle-aged man, with a grave look. "Mrs. Audrey, thank you for coming. Please, come in." His office was spacious, with a panoramic view of the city. He closed the door and activated a button that frosted the window glass. "I need to ensure total privacy for this conversation," he explained. "Mr. Mason, I'm starting to worry. What is so important and secret about my son?" He took a deep breath. "Mrs. Audrey, what I am about to tell you will seem unbelievable, but I ask you to listen to me until the end." I nodded, feeling a chill. "Your son, Matthew, came to me approximately 3 months ago with a very serious concern. He discovered serious financial irregularities involving your other son, Robert." "Irregularities? What kind?" "Diversion of funds from the company where Robert works. Matthew discovered it by chance while analyzing some documents that fell into his hands. But that was only the beginning." Charles took a thick folder from his drawer and opened it in front of me. "Matthew discovered that Robert was not only diverting money, but was planning something much more serious that involved you." I looked at the documents, seeing copies of emails, bank statements, something that looked like a contract for the sale of my house with my forged signature. "I don't understand," I murmured, feeling the room spin. "Mrs. Audrey, Matthew discovered that Robert and Clara have huge debts, gambling, failed investments, a lifestyle far above what they can afford. They plan to sell your house and transfer all your assets to themselves as soon as possible." "But that doesn't make sense. They would need my authorization." "Exactly, and that's where Matthew became truly worried. He found communications between Robert and a doctor discussing how they could declare you mentally incapacitated to make decisions." I felt as if the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "That is absurd." "Unfortunately, it is not. Matthew collected all this evidence. When he confronted Robert, the situation became dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Charles hesitated. "Mrs. Audrey, Matthew feared for his own life. That's when we decided he needed to temporarily disappear." "Disappear? What do you mean?" Charles looked toward the private restroom door in his office. It opened slowly, and then I saw the impossible. Matthew walked into the office. My son, whom I had buried 3 days earlier, was alive in front of my eyes. "Mom," he said softly, his eyes glassy. Everything went dark around me. The last thing I remember is hearing Matthew yell my name as I fell. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on the office sofa. Matthew was holding my hand. For a moment, I thought everything was just a cruel dream. The funeral, the pain, everything. "Mom, it's me," he said, squeezing my hand. "Forgive me for the suffering I caused you. It was the only way to protect you." "How?" I murmured, touching his face, feeling his skin warm and real. "We buried you. I saw your body." "It wasn't me," Matthew explained gently. "Charles helped me fake everything. The body was of an unidentified man from the morgue, with physical characteristics similar to mine. We have contacts who helped us with the necessary documents." I looked at Charles, who nodded gravely. "I know it seems like a bad spy movie, Mum, but when I discovered what Robert was planning, I realized I needed time to gather all the evidence and protect you." If I just disappeared, he would suspect. I needed everyone, including him, to believe I was dead. But why? Robert is your brother, my son. He would never— Mum, Matthew interrupted gently. I know it's hard to believe, but I have proof. He took the folder from Charles and began to show me documents. Emails exchanged between Robert and a psychiatrist discussing how they could document my supposed mental incapacity. Bank statements showing huge debts in Robert and Clara's names. A detailed plan to sell my house and put me in a retirement home. In the last 2 years, Robert and Clara have accumulated debts of over $3 million, Matthew explained. Gambling, high-risk investments, a lifestyle they can't afford. And now they are desperate. And their solution was to eliminate me, I asked, feeling a pain that went beyond the physical. Not physically, Mum, but legally, yes. They plan to obtain legal guardianship over you, control all your assets, sell everything, and eventually place you in a cheap institution while they spent your money. I suddenly remembered the little things that had been happening in the last few months. Robert and Clara commenting that I was forgetful, documents I didn't remember signing, Clara organizing my medicine, insisting that I needed stronger doses. Have they been drugging me? I asked, horrified at the possibility. I'm afraid so, Charles said. We analyzed some of your medication that Matthew discreetly collected. We found traces of drugs that can cause mental confusion and drowsiness. That's why I felt so tired lately, I murmured. I thought it was depression, old age. Part of it, maybe, Matthew said gently. But they were helping the process. I stayed silent, trying to process everything. My own son planning to steal everything I built in a lifetime of work, and for that, willing to declare me incompetent, to turn me off while I was still breathing. What do we do now? I finally asked. We need to be careful, Charles said. Robert cannot know that Matthew is alive, or that you've discovered the plan. Not yet. So we continue the farce. I pretend nothing happened. For now, Matthew said. We are gathering more evidence involving the correct authorities. Once we have everything in order, we will confront Robert and Clara legally. I looked at my son, my living son, and felt a mixture of joy at having him back and a deep sorrow for the betrayal of the other. How am I going to look at Robert knowing all this? I asked. It will be difficult, Mum, but you are stronger than you imagine. Matthew hugged me, and for the first time since I received the news of his death, I truly cried. Not tears of mourning, but of relief, rage, and determination. Returning home that afternoon, I found Robert waiting for me, visibly irritated. Where were you, Mum? I was worried. You said you were going to the drugstore, but when I called, they told me they hadn't seen you today. I took a deep breath, remembering Matthew's advice to act normally. Oh, I went to another pharmacy. Then I ended up stopping at a cafe. I needed a moment alone. Robert studied me, as if assessing whether I was lying. Well, you shouldn't go out like that without telling us. You're not in the emotional state to be wandering around the city. I'm not an invalid, son, I replied, trying not to show the anger building up in my chest. I just needed some time to myself. Sure, Mum. We're just worried about you. Right, Clara? I hadn't noticed Clara standing at the kitchen entrance, observing our conversation with that placid smile that now seemed calculated. Of course, she replied, approaching. In fact, I brought your evening medication. You look so tired. She handed me a glass of water and 2 pills. I looked at the pills that, until yesterday, I would have taken without question. Thank you, dear, but I'll take them later. I don't have an appetite right now. I saw a quick exchange of glances between them. It's important to maintain the regularity of the medication, Audrey, Clara insisted, especially the sleeping ones. The doctor was very clear about that. Which doctor? I asked innocently. Another glance between them. Dr. Peterson, Robert replied quickly. Do you remember we took you last week? You were so confused after the news about Matthew. I had never met a Dr. Peterson. It was all a lie. Ah, yes, I pretended to agree, but I really prefer to take them later. That night, I locked my bedroom door, something I never did before, and threw the pills down the toilet. For the first time in months, I slept without medication. My mind seemed clearer the next morning, as if a fog had lifted. In the following days, I maintained a facade of normalcy. I let Robert and Clara think they were still in control of the situation, while I secretly communicated with Matthew through a prepaid cell phone that Charles had given me. A week after the revelation, Robert sat down with me during breakfast with some papers in his hand. Mum, I've been thinking about what we discussed about the house. It really is too big for you alone, and the upkeep is expensive. I replied vaguely, sipping my coffee. I found a perfect condo for you, Bond. Small, cozy, with 24-hour security and a nurse on site. A nurse? Of course. And what about the house in Los Angeles? I asked, feigning interest. Well, I thought we could sell it. The housing market is good. With the money, we buy the condo for you, and the rest we can invest to guarantee your comfort. Meaning, they would manage the money. Robert looked surprised by my direct tone, but quickly recovered. Sure, Mum. You don't have to worry about those things. We'll take care of everything. And what if I don't want to sell? His smile wavered for an instant. Mum, I know you're going through a difficult time with the loss of Matthew, but you need to think about the future. You can't keep living in the past. I'm not living in the past, Robert. I'm questioning why all the rush to sell my house. He sighed, as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. Well, there are some practical issues. Clara and I have some unexpected expenses, and since the house will eventually be ours, it makes sense to expedite the process and use some of the money now, when we need it. There it was, the partial confession. I tried to control my rage. So, basically, you want to sell my house to pay off your debts? Robert paled. That's not what I said. It was exactly what you said, son. He stood up, visibly disturbed. I think you're not understanding. Maybe you're still very upset. I'm understanding perfectly, I replied calmly. I just don't agree. In the following days, I noticed a subtle change in Robert and Clara's approach. They went from direct insistence to a more subtle strategy. Worried comments about my memory became more frequent. Mum, did you take your medicine today? You seem confused, Robert would ask, even when I was perfectly lucid. Audrey, do you remember that conversation we had yesterday about selling the house? Clara would question, referring to a conversation that never happened. They were little seeds of doubt, planted daily, designed to make me question my own sanity. If I didn't know what was happening, I could easily start to doubt myself. At night, when I was alone, I exchanged messages with Matthew, who updated me on the progress of the investigation. Charles had hired a private detective and was gathering concrete evidence of Robert's debts, the forgeries, and the plan to declare me incompetent. We need more time, Matthew wrote. We're almost ready, but we have to be careful. Robert has dangerous connections. That intrigued me. What kind of connections could my son have? The boy I raised, who played with toy cars in the yard, who cried in my lap when he was struck out for the first time. How had he transformed into this calculating stranger? One afternoon, while Robert and Clara were out, I decided to do something risky. I went into the guest room where they had been sleeping since Matthew's funeral. Poking around their things, I found a folder hidden at the bottom of the closet. Inside were credit card statements showing astronomical debts at casinos, luxury stores, expensive trips. There were also documents related to loans with loan sharks, the dangerous connections Matthew had mentioned. Robert owed money to dangerous people and was desperate to pay them. I also found an envelope with photos. I was shocked to see images of myself, clearly taken without my knowledge, at moments when I looked confused or tired, probably after taking the medication they were giving me. There were notes on the back of each photo. Confused upon waking, couldn't remember where she put the keys. Asked the same thing twice. They were building a case against me, meticulously documenting any normal lapse to use as evidence of my supposed mental incapacity. There was also a letter from a doctor, presumably the so-called Dr. Peterson, discussing my case. The doctor suggested that, with the adequate documentation, he could issue a report attesting that I suffered from early-onset dementia and was unable to manage my own assets. I photographed everything with the cell phone Matthew had given me and put the documents back exactly as they were. My heart was pounding, not only from the fear of being discovered, but from the confirmation of the betrayal. Seeing the concrete evidence was very different from just hearing about it. I sent the photos to Matthew, who responded immediately. "This is exactly what we needed. We are going to accelerate the plan. In 2 days, we'll have everything ready." That same evening, during dinner, Robert brought up the house matter again. "Mum, I found an interested buyer. He's willing to pay above market value, but we need to give him a quick answer." "What a coincidence," I commented casually. "You find a buyer before I even decide if I want to sell." Robert exchanged a glance with Clara. "Actually," he said slowly, "we had already talked about this, remember? You agreed it would be best." "I don't recall that conversation," I replied, knowing perfectly well that it never happened. "See," Clara said, with an exaggerated expression of concern. "This is what we're talking about, Audrey. These memory lapses are becoming more frequent." "It's not a memory lapse," I stated firmly. "It's impossible for me to forget having agreed to sell my house." "Mum," Robert sighed, "this is getting complicated. Maybe it's time to consider a more serious evaluation. Dr. Peterson mentioned that." "What Dr. Peterson?" I interrupted, feigning confusion. "I've never consulted any Dr. Peterson." Another exchange of glances. "The geriatrician who saw you last month," Clara said patiently, as if talking to a child. "Do you really not remember?" "No, I don't remember," I replied, "because it never happened." Robert put down his cutlery and faced me. "Mum, this is exactly what worries us. You've had these episodes. You deny things that happened. You forget important conversations." "Or maybe," I suggested, "you are saying we had conversations that never happened." The silence that followed was tense. I realized I had gone too far. I shouldn't confront them yet. "Excuse me," I backed off. "I'm tired. I think I'll go to bed early tonight." "Sure, Mum," Robert said, relief visible on his face. "Clara will bring your medicine." "It's not necessary," I replied quickly. "I already took it." "You took it?" Clara asked, frowning. "When?" "Before dinner." Another exchange of glances. "Mum, you shouldn't take medication unsupervised. You might get confused with the doses." "I've been taking this medication for years, Robert. I know how they work." I retreated to my room, locking the door again. Seconds later, I heard soft knocking. "Audrey?" Clara called. "I brought you some tea." "I don't want any, thank you," I replied, "but it will help you sleep." "I'm fine, Clara. I just want to be alone." I heard her hesitate on the other side of the door. Then her steps moved away. I picked up the hidden cell phone and texted Matthew. They're getting more insistent. I think they realized I'm no longer taking their medicine. I don't know how much longer I can keep up this charade. The reply came quickly. Hold on just one more day, Mum. Tomorrow night everything will be resolved. The next morning, Robert announced he had a surprise. Mum, I managed to schedule a consultation with a memory specialist. He'll see us this afternoon. Today? I questioned. So suddenly. It's a special favor, he explained. That doctor is very much in demand, but he made an exception for us. I immediately suspected. Could this be the so-called Dr. Peterson who would issue the false report? They were speeding up the plan, probably pressured by their creditors. I don't know, Robert. I don't feel very well today. All the more reason to go, he insisted. The doctor can prescribe something more effective than those old medicines you take. I needed to buy time. I discreetly sent a message to Matthew, informing him about the appointment. Do not go under any circumstances, he replied. It's a trap. We are accelerating our plan too. Stay home today. Make up any excuse. Robert, I said, coming out of the room after exchanging messages with Matthew. I'm sorry, but I won't be able to go to the appointment. I just remembered that we scheduled to clear out Matthew's apartment today. The real estate called. Robert's expression hardened. That can wait, Mum. Your health is more important. No, it can't, I insisted. The lease ends today. If we don't remove his things, they'll discard them. Those are your brother's last memories. Robert seemed about to explode, but he controlled himself. All right, he said, controlling his voice. I'll reschedule the appointment, but tomorrow for sure, okay? Sure, I agreed, knowing that by then everything would have changed. That afternoon, Robert went out to sort some things out. Clara stayed home, watching me like a hawk. She insisted that I drink some tea, which I politely declined. She suggested that I rest, that we watch a movie together, anything to keep me under her sight. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Clara went to answer it and returned with a pale expression. Audrey, she said with a trembling voice, there's someone wanting to talk to you about Matthew. I got up from the sofa, feeling my heart pound. Was Matthew's plan already in action? In the entrance hall, I found a tall man in a suit holding a police badge. Mrs. Audrey Smith? He asked. I am Commander Jenkins. I need to speak with you about your son, Matthew Smith. Yes, of course, I replied, trying to maintain composure. Clara came closer, placing her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that I would have previously interpreted as support, but now recognized as control. I'm Clara, her daughter-in-law. What happened? The commander looked at her with a neutral expression. If you don't mind, I need to speak with Mrs. Audrey privately. But she's fragile, Clara insisted. She recently lost her son. I understand, but it's a confidential matter. It's all right, Clara, I intervened. We can use the study. I led the commander to the study that had been my late husband's and closed the door. As soon as we were alone, he spoke in a low voice. Mrs. Audrey, I am a friend of Charles Mason. Your son Matthew sought me out with pretty serious evidence regarding illegal activities involving your other son, Robert. So that was it. The plan was underway. We are about to arrest Robert for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted fraudulent legal guardianship, he continued. But first, we need to ensure your safety. There is a chance Robert might react unpredictably when he finds out he's been discovered. What should I do? I asked, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. A police team is positioned near your house. We are waiting for Robert to return to make the arrest. And Clara? I asked. Is she involved too? Yes. We have evidence that she was an accomplice in the entire scheme. Both will be arrested. I tried to process the magnitude of it all. My two sons, one faking his own death to protect me, the other conspiring against me. There's one more thing you need to know, the commander added, lowering his voice even more. Your son, Matthew, is here. My heart jumped. Here? Where? In the car, a block away. He insisted on being present despite the risks. Do you want to see him before we arrest Robert? Yes, I answered without hesitation. The commander took his cell phone and sent a quick message. I'm going to create a distraction for Clara. When I walk out to the living room with her, you exit through the back door. There's a black car waiting on the corner. I nodded, feeling like a character in a spy movie. What should I tell her about our conversation? Say we are investigating some irregularities in Matthew's life insurance. Nothing to worry about, just paperwork. We left the study, and the commander asked Clara to show him the insurance documents. While they headed to the living room, I silently slipped out the kitchen door that led to the yard. My heart was pounding so loudly that I feared Clara could hear it. I crossed the garden, exited through the side gate, and spotted the black car. The back door opened as I approached. I quickly got in, and there he was. Matthew, my son, alive. We hugged in silence, both trembling with emotion. There were no words for that moment. Mum, he finally said, it's ending. Today, this all ends. How are you? I asked, still holding his face between my hands, as I did when he was a child. Worried about you. It was harder than I imagined to be away, knowing the danger. Your brother, I started, but couldn't complete the sentence. I know, Matthew responded sadly. I still can't believe what he became. Charles, who was in the passenger seat, turned to us. Robert just arrived at the house, he reported. The police will move in shortly. I want to be there, I declared. Mum, it's not safe, Matthew protested. I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to look him in the eye when he finds out I know everything. Matthew exchanged glances with Charles, who nodded reluctantly. All right, but I'll go with you. It's time Robert knows he didn't succeed. We drove back to the house with the car, now accompanied by 2 police cruisers. When we entered the living room, Robert was sitting on the sofa, talking tensely with Clara. Both turned when they heard the door. The shock on Robert's face when he saw Matthew was something I will never forget. His eyes widened. His face paled as if he had seen a ghost, which, in a way, was exactly what he was seeing. What is this? He stammered, standing up. Hello, brother, Matthew said calmly. Clara let out a muffled scream, covering her mouth with her hands. Impossible, she murmured. You're dead. You saw what was convenient for you to see, Matthew replied, just as I saw what you were planning for our mother. The police officers entered the living room, led by Commander Jenkins. Robert Smith, Clara Smith, you are being arrested for multiple counts of fraud, forgery of documents, conspiracy, and attempted fraudulent legal guardianship. Robert looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting from Matthew to me to the police officers. Suddenly his gaze hardened. This is ridiculous, he exclaimed. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can, the commander said, gesturing to one of the officers, who opened a folder. We have copies of emails exchanged between you and Dr. Peterson, discussing the issuance of a false medical report declaring your mother mentally incapacitated. We have the forged documents with her signature. We have evidence that you opened credit cards in her name without her consent. Robert looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "Mum, it's not what it looks like," he tried. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me," I repeated, keeping my voice firm despite the pain consuming me. "Drugging me, stealing my money, planning to put me in a home. Is that protection, Robert?" "You don't understand. We were desperate." "Because of the gambling debts?" I asked. "The loans from loan sharks? The extravagant spending?" He seemed surprised that I knew so many details. "How—" "I found your documents," I explained. "The day you went out, I saw everything. The statements, the photos you took of me, the notes, everything." Clara, silent until then, suddenly lunged in my direction. "You nosy old woman, you ruined everything." A police officer restrained her before she could reach me. "Clara Smith, you are under arrest." As the officers handcuffed the couple, I looked at Robert, no longer the boy I raised, but a stranger whose eyes burned with rage. "This isn't over," he threatened as he was led away. "I have connections. You're going to regret this." Matthew put his arm around me, protecting me as he had always done. "It's over, Mum," he said softly. "They can't hurt you anymore." But as I watched my youngest son being led away by the police, I knew that some wounds would never fully heal. The days following Robert and Clara's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and bureaucracy. Statements to the police, meetings with lawyers, endless forms to annul the forgeries and undo the financial damage they had caused. But amidst all that chaos, there was a deep joy. Matthew was alive. My son's official resurrection had required almost as much paperwork as his death. Charles mobilized a legal team to deal with the legal complications. There were fines to pay for the falsification of the death certificate, explanations to give to the authorities, a new funeral to arrange for the real occupant of the coffin we buried, a man without family whose identity was temporarily borrowed thanks to Charles's contacts. "What was it like living in hiding all this time?" I asked Matthew one night, as we had dinner alone at home for the first time since everything happened. "Lonely," he admitted. "I stayed in a safe apartment that Charles got me in Philadelphia. I only went out for the essentials, always disguised. The hardest part was knowing that you were suffering, believing I was dead, yet exposed to danger." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Matthew sighed, putting down his cutlery. "It was my biggest doubt. Charles and I discussed it for days. In the end, we decided that your reaction of grief needed to be genuine, so Robert wouldn't suspect. If you knew the truth, you might not have been able to keep up the charade." "You underestimated my acting skills," I commented with a small smile. "Perhaps," he smiled back. "But we also didn't know how far Robert was willing to go. If he sensed that you knew something, he might have sped up his plans." The implication hung heavy between us. How far would my own son have gone to get what he wanted? "The hearings start next week," I commented, changing the subject. "The lawyer said Robert is trying to negotiate a plea deal." "Typical of him," Matthew responded bitterly. "Always looking for the easiest way out, even at the expense of others. Clara is cooperating with the prosecution, offering information in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently, she's putting all the blame on Robert. I'm not surprised. She was always manipulative." I looked out the window, toward the backyard where my two boys used to play together, building forts out of branches and leaves, defending themselves from imaginary enemies. "Where did we go wrong with him, Matthew? What happened to that sweet boy we knew?" Matthew was silent for a moment. "I don't think we went wrong, Mum. Some people just make bad decisions, then more bad decisions to cover up the first ones, and before they know it, they're caught in a downward spiral." "But trying to rob his own mother?" drugging me, committing me. His debts were worse than we imagined. The detective discovered that Robert owed more than $4 million to loan sharks linked to organized crime. They were threatening his life and Clara's. He could have asked for help, I argued. We would have found a solution. Pride, perhaps. Shame? Or maybe he went so far that he no longer saw a way back. I thought about Matthew's words. How many small decisions, how many lies had my son told himself to justify his actions? At what point did he cross the line, transforming from a loving son into a conspirator willing to destroy his own mother? The following week, we faced the first hearing of the case. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the emails, the forged documents, the testimonies from the doctor who had been bribed to issue the false report. Robert's lawyer argued that he had acted under duress, fearing for his life due to the debts with criminals. He tried to paint my son as a victim of circumstances, someone who made mistakes out of desperation, not malice. When I had to testify, I looked directly at Robert. He kept his eyes down, unable to meet my gaze. I described how they had tried to make me doubt my own mind, how they had drugged me, how they planned to tear me away from my home and put me in an institution while they spent my money. "Does the lady believe her son poses a danger to you?" the prosecutor asked. I hesitated. Despite everything, he was my son. "I believe he poses a danger to himself and to anyone who has something he wants," I finally replied. "I no longer recognize him as the son I raised." I saw Robert shrink in his seat. After 3 weeks of hearings, the judge delivered the sentence. Robert was sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Clara, in exchange for her cooperation, received a sentence of 3 years, with the possibility of progression to a work release program after 1 year. As the judge read the sentence, I watched Robert. There was no longer any arrogance on his face, only defeat. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I thought I saw a flash of the boy he had been. Lost, scared, regretful. But then the moment passed, and he was led away by the guards. In the courthouse parking lot, Matthew asked me, "How do you feel?" "Like I lost a son again," I replied honestly. Only this time, it was by his choice. "Do you think you can forgive him someday?" I looked up at the sky, thinking about the answer. "I don't know, Matthew. Forgiveness is not something you decide on one day. It's a process." "And us? What do we do now?" It was a good question. Our life had been turned upside down twice, first by Matthew's death, then by Robert's betrayal. "I think we need a new beginning," I suggested. "This house has too many memories now. Some good, others too painful." In the following months, I put the house in Los Angeles up for sale, ironically fulfilling Robert's wish, but on my own terms. Matthew and I found a smaller, cozier house in a coastal town 2 hours away, like Santa Monica. A place where no one knew us, where we wouldn't be the mother and brother of that man who tried to rob his own family. On moving day, I took one last walk through the empty house where I had raised my children. Every room held memories. Robert taking his first steps in this living room, Matthew studying late in that room, both running down the hallway on rainy days. I stopped in Robert's room, now empty except for a box I had set aside. Photos of him growing up, his report cards, the drawings he made for me on Mother's Day. I couldn't get rid of those memories, even after everything. "Ready?" Matthew asked, standing in the doorway. "Almost," I replied. "I just need a minute." When he left, I placed an envelope inside the box. It was a letter I had written for Robert, not to send now, but perhaps someday, when the wounds weren't so open. "My son," the letter began, I don't know when or if you will read this, but I want you to know that, despite everything that happened, a part of me still remembers the boy you were. I cannot forgive what you did. Not now. Perhaps never. But I also cannot erase 35 years of love. That will always be there, like a scar that never completely fades. I closed the box, took a deep breath, and prepared to leave that life behind. In the new house, Matthew and I settled into a quiet routine. He continued working remotely for the same company, although Charles had offered him a partnership after everything they had been through together. Our new house was just a few feet from the beach in Santa Monica. Every morning, I would walk on the sand, still cool from the night, watching the sea in its eternal motion. There was something comforting in that constancy. The waves came and went, regardless of the human dramas unfolding on their shores. About 6 months after we moved, I received a letter from the penitentiary where Robert was serving his sentence. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, uncertain if I wanted to read what was inside. "We'll face it together," Matthew said, sitting beside me on the sofa. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. "Mum," the letter began. "I don't know where to start." The words, "I'm sorry" or "forgive me," seem so small compared to what I did that they're almost not worth writing. But they are the only ones I have. I have a lot of time to think in here, to think about how I got to this point, about how I could conspire against the person who gave me life, who held my hand when I took my first steps, who stayed up all night when I had a fever. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to visit me or write me back. I just needed you to know that, in the midst of this darkness I find myself in, I am finally seeing clearly the monster I became. The prison's mandatory therapy has helped me understand my behavior patterns, how one lie led to another, how I convinced myself that money and status were more important than family, how I rationalized every terrible decision, telling myself it was only temporary, that one day I would make up for everything. I know words are just words, especially coming from someone who lied as much as I did, but they are sincere, however empty that may sound now. If someday, years in the future, you feel you can give me the chance to prove with actions the repentance I feel, I will be waiting. If not, I will understand. You have suffered enough because of me. With love, although I have proven not to deserve to use that word, Robert. When I finished reading, I realized I was crying. I didn't know exactly why, whether it was for the loss of the son I knew, for the pain I still felt from his betrayal, or for some confusing hope that maybe, just maybe, those words were true. Matthew remained silent, respecting my moment. "What do you think?" I finally asked. "Honestly, I don't know," he replied. Robert was always good with words. Do you remember how he managed to get out of trouble at school? How he convinced teachers he deserved a second chance? I nodded, remembering how my younger son had the gift of charming people. "But I also know that people can change," Matthew continued, "especially when they hit rock bottom. And Robert certainly got there." "Could you forgive him someday?" I asked. Matthew thought for a moment. "Maybe, with a lot of time and a lot of proof that the change is genuine. But trusting him again, that would be much harder." I put the letter away in a drawer, undecided whether to reply or not. A few days later, during my morning walk on the beach, I found an elderly woman sitting on a bench, watching the sea. We started talking, as happens in small towns. Her name was Amelia. She was 78 years old and had been living alone since her husband had passed away. When I mentioned that I had recently moved to town, she asked why. Surprisingly, I found myself telling her the whole story about Matthew's false death, Robert's conspiracy, everything. It was the first time I had talked about it with anyone other than Matthew, Charles, and the lawyers. "You know," Amelia said when I finished, "I have a not-so-different story." She told me that decades ago, her daughter had stolen all her savings to support a drug addiction. She had lied, manipulated, and even threatened her own mother. "For years I didn't speak to her," Amelia explained. "I couldn't. The pain was too great. But one day, I received a letter similar to the one you describe. I ignored it. Then came another, and another. For 3 years, my daughter wrote to me monthly, without me responding even once." "And what happened?" I asked. "In the 4th year, I decided to read all the letters at once. I saw a progression in them, from despair to acceptance, from self-pity to true repentance. In the last letter, she no longer asked for anything. She just told me about her life, her recovery, how she was trying to help other people with similar problems." Amelia smiled, looking at the horizon. "I decided to visit her. It was strange, painful, but also healing in a way. Today we have a relationship. It's not perfect. It will never be like before. But it's something. And you know what? I don't regret giving her that chance. Even if it had ended badly, I wouldn't regret it, because I needed to know, for myself, if it was possible to rebuild something from the ruins." Her words stayed with me for days. The following week, I wrote a brief reply to Robert. "I received your letter. I am not ready to forgive or forget. Maybe I never will be. But I am willing to read what you have to say. That is all I can offer now." It was the beginning of a cautious correspondence. At first, we exchanged letters every month. Robert told me about his routine in prison, his therapy sessions, the jobs he performed inside. He never asked for anything, never pushed for visits or forgiveness. Matthew, initially skeptical, began to admit that there might be a genuine change in his brother. "The letters seem different," he commented after reading one of them with my permission. "Less manipulative, more thoughtful." A year after the first letter, Robert mentioned that he was participating in a financial rehabilitation program, learning to deal with money responsibly. He was also teaching math classes to other inmates, helping them get their high school equivalency diploma. "I discovered that teaching gives me a purpose that money never did," he wrote. "Seeing someone understand a new concept, seeing the pride in the eyes of men whom society discarded when they managed to solve a problem, that is priceless." In the 2nd year of our correspondence, I made a difficult decision. I would go visit him. "Are you sure?" Matthew asked, worried. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." "I need to see it with my own eyes," I replied. "I need to look him in the eye and feel if there is truth in what he writes." The day of the visit arrived, cold and cloudy. The penitentiary was an oppressive place. High walls, barbed wire fences, armed guards. I went through various security procedures before being taken to the visiting room. When Robert walked in, I barely recognized him. He was thinner, his hair cut short in the prison style, his face marked by a seriousness he had never had before. His eyes, however, were the same. The eyes of my youngest son, now glassy at the sight of me. "Mum," he said simply, his voice choked. "Robert," I replied, maintaining my composure. We sat on opposite sides of a simple table. For a few minutes, neither of us could say anything. "Thank you for coming," he finally spoke. "I didn't expect it." "Neither did I admitted. It was a last-minute decision." "How is Matthew?" he asked. It was the first time he had mentioned his brother in our correspondence. "He's fine. He still has nightmares about the fake funeral." Robert lowered his eyes. "I am so sorry for everything. I know it doesn't mean much, but—" "Why, Robert?" I interrupted, the question escaping me before I could contain it. Why did you go that far? He took a deep breath, as if he had been expecting that question. At first, it was just small bets. I thought I could control it. When I realized it, I was drowning in debt. Clara liked a lavish life, and I wanted to impress her. One thing led to another. I started borrowing money from dangerous people. Then came the pressure, the threats. But why didn't you ask for our help? Pride, shame, and after a while the debts were so big that I knew you couldn't help, even if you wanted to. That's when I started seeing your assets as a solution. The brutal honesty of his words hit me like a punch. And drugging me? Making me think I was losing my memory? He closed his eyes, as if he couldn't bear his own reflection in my eyes. Each step seemed like a small transgression at the time. A stronger medicine, so you would sleep and wouldn't notice when we took documents. Then, so you wouldn't question when we talked about conversations that never happened. It was a slippery slope. Every small lie made the next one easier. Our conversation continued for almost an hour. There was no great catharsis, no dramatic moment of forgiveness or reconciliation. Just two adults, mother and son, trying to understand how they had reached that point. When I left the penitentiary that afternoon, I felt simultaneously exhausted and relieved. Seeing Robert face to face, hearing his explanations, had brought a kind of closure that the letters couldn't provide. "How did it go?" Matthew asked anxiously when I arrived home. "Difficult," I replied honestly, "but necessary." In the following months, I continued exchanging letters with Robert, now with greater frequency. Occasionally, I made another visit. Matthew refused to accompany me. He wasn't ready to face the brother who had killed him and conspired against his mother. "Maybe someday," he would always say when I asked, "but not now." I understood his resistance. The betrayal he suffered was double, not only as a son, but also as a brother who had his identity stolen, his death staged, all because of his own brother's greed. One day, about 2.5 years after Robert's arrest, I received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Audrey Smith, I'm Dr. Miller, a psychologist at the state penitentiary." "Yes?" I replied, immediately fearing the worst. "Did something happen to my son?" No. I apologize for alarming you. In fact, I'm calling with good news. Your son has excelled in our rehabilitation program. He developed a math teaching method for inmates with learning difficulties that is achieving remarkable results." "That's amazing," I commented. "Yes, and that's why I'm calling. We are considering Robert for the work release program progression. He has already served more than 1/3 of his sentence. He has demonstrated excellent behavior and genuine repentance. With his background in business, he could work during the day and return to the penitentiary at night." The news caught me by surprise. Part of me was happy for Robert's progress, but another part felt an instinctive apprehension. And when would that happen? "If everything goes well in the final evaluation in 3 months, the doctor explained. He mentioned that he would like to know your opinion before accepting the progression." That surprised me even more. My opinion? Why? "He said he doesn't want you to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. If you prefer him to remain in the closed regime for longer, he will understand and wait." I promised the doctor I would think about it and give him an answer in a few days. When I told Matthew, his reaction was skeptical. "Work release program? Already? And doesn't that supposed interest in your opinion seem more like manipulation?" "Maybe," I admitted, "but the psychologist seems genuinely impressed with his progress." "Psychologists can be fooled," Matthew argued. "Robert always knew how to present well when it was convenient." That night, I reread all the letters Robert had sent me over the last few years. I looked for signs of manipulation, falsehood, a long-term plan. But what I saw was a progression, from the first letters full of self-pity to the most recent ones, where he talked about the other inmates he was helping, the small satisfactions of seeing someone learn something new, the therapy that was finally making him understand his own demons. The following week, during my regular visit, I confronted Robert about the psychologist's call. "Why did you ask for my opinion on your work release progression?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "I thought it was the least I could do," Robert replied, his gaze direct and unwavering. "After all the harm I caused, I don't want you to feel threatened or unsafe because I am freer. And if I say I prefer you to continue in the closed regime, then that's what I'll do," he replied simply. "I will wait as long as necessary." I studied his face, looking for signs of falsehood, of calculation. I found nothing but resigned acceptance. "Why are you teaching math to other inmates?" I asked, changing the subject. His face brightened slightly. "It started by chance. One of the guys in my block was trying to get his equivalency diploma, but was having trouble with algebra. I offered to help. Soon, others started asking me too." He paused. "These men, Mom, many never had a real chance in life. Some can barely read. When I see the pride in their eyes in solving a problem for the first time, it's like I'm doing something that really matters." There was a sincerity in his voice that moved me. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the boy he had been. Curious, brilliant, always willing to explain things to others. After reflecting for several days, I made my decision. I called Dr. Miller and informed him that I did not object to Robert's progression to the work release program. Matthew was not happy. "We're taking an unnecessary risk," he argued. "What if he returns to his old ways? What if he decides to visit you when he's free during the day?" "He'll be monitored," I explained. "And honestly, Matthew, at some point we have to accept the possibility that people can change." "Some people, maybe," he replied. "But Robert deceived us for so long." "I know it's harder for you," I acknowledged. "He not only betrayed your trust, but he forced you into an extreme situation. I'm not asking you to forgive him, just to accept that I'm willing to give him this chance." 3 months later, Robert started the work release program. He got a job at a non-profit organization that worked with the reintegration of ex-inmates, where he used his administrative skills during the day, returning to the penitentiary at night and on weekends. In his letters, he described his work with enthusiasm. "I'm helping people who made mistakes like me find a way back into society. It's ironic and appropriate at the same time." We spent another year in that routine. Robert working during the day, serving his sentence at night, our occasional visits, and frequent letters. Matthew remained reluctant to any contact with his brother, although I noticed he asked more questions about Robert, about his job, about his apparent rehabilitation. Then, the day of the hearing for full parole arrived. Robert could live in a halfway house, needing only to present himself periodically to the court. "I'll go to the hearing," I announced to Matthew on the eve. He was silent for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I'll go too." "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted. "But I think it's time to face this as a family, or what's left of it." The hearing was brief, but intense. The judge reviewed Robert's prison record. He listened to the testimonies of the psychologists and supervisors, all positive. When he asked if anyone in the family would like to speak, I stood up. "My son made serious mistakes," I began, feeling the weight of every word. "He conspired against me, betrayed my trust, caused immense suffering to our family. But over the last 3 years, I have seen a consistent and genuine effort on his part to change, to understand the reasons behind his actions, and to repair, as much as possible, the damage he caused. I support his progression to full parole." To my surprise, Matthew also stood up. "Your Honour, I am Matthew Smith, the accused's brother. I was a direct victim of his actions, having been forced to fake my own death to protect our mother from his plans. He paused, looking directly at Robert for the first time in almost 4 years. I am not ready to forgive my brother. Perhaps I never will be. But I recognize the efforts he has made. I do not object to his progression. I saw Robert lower his head, silent tears running down his face. The judge granted the parole. When the hearing ended, Robert approached us hesitantly. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't deserve this, but I'm going to try to live up to the opportunity you are giving me." Matthew only nodded briefly, still unable to express any affection, but that small gesture meant more than 1,000 words. In the following weeks, Robert settled into a halfway house, continuing his work at the non-profit. He also started a night class for a bachelor's degree in mathematics. He wanted to become a teacher. "I discovered that teaching gives me a purpose I never found before," he wrote. "I want to do something that truly matters, that helps other people." About 6 months after his move to parole, Robert asked for something that took me by surprise. He wanted to invite us, Matthew and me, for lunch. "I completely understand if you refuse," he wrote, "but I would like the opportunity to be with you outside the penitentiary environment, as a family, or at least try." I showed the letter to Matthew, expecting his immediate refusal. He read it in silence, then sighed deeply. "I think it's time," he finally said. "Not for him, but for us. To close this chapter somehow." The lunch took place at a simple restaurant near the halfway house. At first, the atmosphere was tense, loaded with unspoken words and deep grudges. But little by little, as the meal progressed, something began to shift. It wasn't a miraculous reconciliation. There were no emotional hugs or instantaneous pardons, just 3 people trying to find a new way to coexist, aware of the past but not completely prisoners of it. The following years were a slow process of rebuilding. Robert finished serving his sentence, got his math teacher's diploma, and started working at a public school on the outskirts of New York City, teaching vulnerable teenagers. Our family lunches became more frequent, monthly, then bi-weekly. Matthew and Robert never regained the closeness they had in childhood, but they developed a cautious respect for each other. Deep wounds like ours don't fully heal, but with time, the sharp pain gave way to a melancholy acceptance. 5 years after that call that changed everything, we received an invitation from Robert. He was graduating with honors from his bachelor's degree and would like us to be present. At the ceremony, I watched my youngest son receive his diploma, his face mature and serene, so different from the desperate, greedy man who had conspired against his own mother. Beside him, a young teacher from the same school where he worked, Sarah, his girlfriend for almost a year, a gentle woman who knew our entire history and still chose to stay by his side. "Are you okay?" Matthew asked, noticing my glassy eyes. "I'm thinking about how unpredictable life is," I replied. "If someone had told me 6 years ago that the 3 of us would be here today, celebrating Robert's graduation, you would have thought it was crazy," he completed. "And yet, here we are." After the ceremony, Robert approached us, holding his diploma and bringing Sarah by the hand. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice choked. "It means more than I can express." "We're proud of you," I replied, and I realized it was true. Matthew extended his hand to his brother, a gesture that, in its simplicity, carried enormous weight. "Good job," he said simply. That night, after Matthew went home, I sat on the balcony of my house by the sea in Santa Monica, reflecting on the extraordinary journey our family had taken. From betrayal to redemption, from mourning to rebirth, from distrust to the possibility of renewed confidence. I thought about how our lives had been transformed by Matthew's single desperate decision, faking his own death to protect me. What would have happened if he hadn't been so vigilant, if he hadn't discovered Robert's plans in time? I would probably be in some institution, drugged and confused, while Robert and Clara depleted my savings. Or maybe worse. I also thought about Clara, who served her reduced sentence and disappeared from our lives. According to the latest rumors, she had married an entrepreneur in another city, completely reinventing herself. I sincerely hoped that she too had found a better path. I realized I was smiling, despite everything. Not because the past didn't matter. It always would. It would always be a part of who we were. But because we had found a way not to let it define our future. The next morning, Robert showed up for coffee. He was nervous, restless. "There's something I want to ask you," he finally said. "I'll perfectly understand if the answer is no." "What is it?" "Sarah and I are thinking of getting married next year." "That's wonderful," I replied sincerely. Sarah was a good influence on his life, an anchor of stability. "Yes, but, well, we're looking for a place to live. Something small, modest, near the school where we work. And I was thinking if you would lend me some money for the down payment." I felt a pang of apprehension. Money had been the trigger for the entire tragedy in our family. "It's not much," he continued quickly, perceiving my hesitation. "I have some savings. Sarah does too. It would just be to supplement. And of course, we would draw up a formal contract, with monthly payments." I raised my hand, interrupting him. "Robert, I'm going to think about it. Not because I don't trust you now, but because we need to be careful with these matters in our family, considering our history." He nodded, visibly relieved that I hadn't refused immediately. "Sure, Mum. Take all the time you need, and if the answer is no, I'll completely understand." When he left, I called Matthew. I told him about Robert's request. "What do you think?" I asked. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I think it's a test," he finally said. "Not for Robert, but for us, to see if we really believe he has changed." "And do you believe it?" Another silence. "I think he's trying," Matthew replied cautiously. "I think he's no longer the person he was. But I think we should be prudent." "How?" "Maybe we can help in a way that doesn't involve handing over money directly. We could co-sign the loan, for example. Or buy the house and set up a formal rent-to-own contract." It was a sensible suggestion, a middle ground between trust and caution. 2 days later, I called Robert to talk. I explained the proposal that Matthew and I had put together. "It's not a matter of not trusting you," I explained. "It's about establishing healthy boundaries after everything we've been through." To my surprise, Robert seemed genuinely relieved. "That's perfect," he said. "To be honest, I worried after making the request. I thought it might give the wrong impression, that it might look like I'm reverting to old habits." "Did you think about that?" "I think about it every day, Mom. I'm afraid of going back to being the person I was, of disappointing you again, of disappointing myself. It's a constant struggle." That honest admission meant more to me than any grand promise could. In the following months, we worked together to find a suitable house for Robert and Sarah near New York City. Matthew, with his financial knowledge, structured a fair contract that protected all parties. It was an exercise in cautious trust, in gradual rebuilding. The day Robert and Sarah moved into the new house, we had a small celebration, just the four of us, with a simple meal in the newly acquired backyard. "A toast," I proposed, raising my glass, "to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," they all repeated. As I watched my two sons talking civilly, I couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary journey we had taken. From desperation to hope, from incomplete but significant betrayal to redemption. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, sitting beside me while the brothers argued about the best way to fix the back deck. "About how life rarely follows the path we expect," I replied, "and how sometimes, from the greatest tragedies, opportunities for growth can arise that we never would have imagined." She smiled, covering my hand with hers. "Robert tells me stories about what you were like when he was a child. He says you were always the strength of the family, even before all this happened." "I didn't feel strong when I found out the truth about their plans," I admitted. "I felt broken, betrayed, lost." "But you survived," she observed. "And more than that, you found a way forward, not just for yourself, but for the whole family." I looked back at my sons, Matthew showing Robert how the deckwood needed to be treated, Robert listening attentively, respectfully. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I had dreamed for us so many years ago. But it was real. It was honest. And that had its own kind of beauty. "You know," I told Sarah, "for a long time, I thought our story was about betrayal. Then I thought it was about forgiveness. Now I realize it's about something more complex, about how to move forward, even when complete forgiveness may never arrive, about finding a new type of relationship from the ashes of the old." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "Robert knows that too," she said softly. "He knows that some bridges, once burned, can never be fully rebuilt. But he's grateful that you at least built a narrow footbridge to cross the chasm." A narrow footbridge. It was a good metaphor for what we had achieved. Not the wide bridge of unrestrained trust we had before, but a fragile connection, carefully maintained, that allowed for some kind of relationship. As the sun began to set, I cast one last glance at my sons before announcing that it was time for me to leave. They were side by side now, not exactly close, but not distant either, working together to measure boards for the deck. It was an image I never would have imagined possible 6 years ago, when I received that fateful call from Matthew's boss. An image that spoke not of perfect happy endings, but of overcoming, resilience, and the complex, imperfect, but profoundly human capacity to start over. Now, if you liked this story, click on subscribe, and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to have access to exclusive videos that I don't publish here. I'll wait for you there.